Good morning. Welcome to Board
Hello,
of Health.
Chair.
Good morning. Welcome to the finance panel, the February meeting of the finance panel. Today's agenda mainly focuses on the outturn for the third quarter. But first of all, can I have any apologies? I know we've got a couple. Kath?
Yes, we've got apologies from Councillor Chris Walsh and Councillor Arwell Jones, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I must apologise as well. We moved this meeting. We're trying to squeeze it in before Cabinet. It was in for last Friday morning, but there was so much stuff on. We've squeezed it to Monday. So thank you everybody for accommodating that. And apologies to Chris and Arwell as well for they are unable to come this today. Item 2, declarations of interest. If anybody's got any, please let me know during the meeting. And then item 3 is the minutes and action log of the last meeting held on the 18th of December, a week before Christmas. Any comment on those? Just a couple of pages there. And nothing flows out of that. Everybody happy with that record? Yeah. Thank you, Karina. No objections. We'll sign those off as correct. Apologies. Next item on the agenda is the responses. Item 4 on the agenda is responses to our recommendations from the scrutiny of the budget on at the end of January. They're there just for information. To be honest, they were dealt with last Thursday at the full council. Unless anybody's got any comments on them, I'll just leave them there. Sorry, have I missed something on the previous action log? Well, thank you for the reminder, Kath. I skimmed over the action log on the previous item. Action log was shared with panel members. You see it there on the second page. And do you have any? Thanks for sharing that, Kath. It's so fine on your screen share. I can't see it. I don't know if anybody else can. Can you just? I'll open my own up. Can you just talk us through them, Kath, while I find my?
Yes, well do, Chair. Do you want me to just go on the open items?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay. We've got an item from 30th of June that is still open, which is regarding returned funding to Welsh Government. I know one of the members was going to be having a chat with the head of Finance Section 151 officer to find further detail on that. That's still outstanding. Another action that's still outstanding is regarding Powys Teaching Health Board contract uplifts. Again, James is going to be speaking with the councillor concerned to find further detail on that. Third item that is still open is the terms of reference.
Okay, Jeremy, the first two were around you. You're going to catch up with Jane at some points. Can I leave you?
Yeah, if Jane can put a date in the diary, I can come up and meet her in Landord anytime.
Okay, brilliant. Jane's nodding ahead there. And the other one, myself and Pete will catch up with Jane as well, just to refresh the terms of reference, if that's okay. Thanks, Jane. No other issues there. Thanks for the reminder, Kath.
Thanks, Chair.
Can we go back to the recommendations Cabinet. Are there any comments on item 4 at all, or shall we go straight to item 5, the revenue report? No comments. Right, we'll go straight to item 5, quarter 3, the revenue report. This is for the quarter ending 31st of December. I know Councillor David is unable to join us for a few minutes. Jane, would you like to just highlight some of those issues that have changed since the last quarter, please?
I can give you a very quick run through of the report. Is probably the best, isn't it? So the position that you see before you is at the end of December, but it is the forecast then for the full year to the 31st of March 2024. You'll recall at quarter 2 we were reporting a projected surplus at that time of 2.9 million, and I'm pleased to say that the position has stabilised at around that. I think it's about 3 million that we're now projecting in terms of that surplus position. We are, however, drawing on the risk reserve or the risk budget, sorry, but not to the extent at the moment that we were anticipating when we set the budget at the beginning of the year. That being said, there is still a significant level of risk left in this budget as forecast, where we still have around £3 million worth of cost reductions to deliver. In the forecast, those are assumed of delivery based on the heads of service commentary that they will still achieve that, but it does give us that element of risk against that further risk budget. Cost reductions table is there for you to see, and there is about 7% or 1.2 million that is not expected to be achieved by year end. Some of that will then be achieved in the following year. There is information there on the reserve showing what we're expecting to draw from reserves during this year. And we've included the schools reserve table in these reports now routinely. I think that was a request from both the Finance Panel and the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee. So that's now been included there, and it shows the use of school reserves supporting their budget plans for the current year. There is then a section on environments and grants. Some of those, if agreed, will reduce the surplus that we're currently projecting. So I think there's one for 400,000 and one for 500,000 there. They will reduce that surplus position at year end if approved, and Cabinet are considering those tomorrow. And there are some grants then that have come through, smaller. Many of them are just slight adjustments to grants. You can see that the values are quite small in terms of those, and those are reported in section 5 as well. That's it, I think, Chair, in terms of a brief update, but happy, of course, to take any questions that the panel has.
Thank you very much, Jane. Karina.
I don't know if it's appropriate now, but just reading through the papers, I'm looking that the schools are going to use all their reserves this year, more or less. Is that a reasonable observation?
Shall I respond?
Please, Jane, since no here from Education Finance team, so
Oh, sorry.
I'll see you. Thanks, Jane.
So yeah, as you can see in the table there, as Councillor Karina says, the opening balance on school reserves was 6.2 million. They are projecting to draw, and I say draw all of it, there's a mix of surpluses and deficits, so it's important just to note that. But yes, the net position on those reserves forecast for the end of the year is roughly about a balanced budget, and that's split, as you can see, in that forecasted position, with primaries holding about 3.2 million, specials holding 500,000, but the secondaries holding deficit reserves of around 3.5 million. So the net effect of all of that looks at only a very small balance maintained collectively across schools. I think there was an expectation that schools would draw on reserves to some degree this year to help support some of their pressures. But again, schools utilise reserves based on pupil number, falls and various things. So it's important to note that. But yes, you are correct in your assumption around that position.
Could I please ask a further question? So next year we've got to give them more money, is that?
Schools, in the budget plan that was approved by council
Yes.
on Thursday, there
Yes.
was additional funding going to schools. I think it was about 4.2%. And there is an expectation that should further money come through in the final settlement, that would also be forwarded to schools' delegated budgets. But I think it's fair to say that schools are going to have to make some changes and make some savings themselves with that level of funding. So very much like the rest of the council having to look to reduce, I'm afraid based on our funding position that we see ourselves in next year, schools are going to have to take some of that challenge as well in balancing their budgets.
Thanks, Karina. Can I just add to that? I know there's been a lot of work done on schools that have deficits, currently have deficits, especially around the secondary schools. However, a lot of the primary schools have used a huge chunk of their reserves. And clearly there's work needs to be done on those schools where they don't set an balanced in year, because the use of that reserves paints a negative picture overall for the school delegated budget. Do you think the finance team that deals with the schools have enough capacity to support all the schools as we approach the next 12 months or the next 2-3 years, to be honest?
We have a team. I think there are about 4 members of staff in the team, together with the finance manager covering the team as well. We have managed to support all schools with that number in the team. I think it's helped a little by some of the teams and meetings that we can do online. It's less traveling for the team, so that's really helped us support more schools. But the team around the school, when we need to go to the school and work with schools, particularly around some of the secondaries, we've put a lot of support in there this year to help them with their recovery plans and so forth. So it can be a challenge. The team are really good and really do all that they possibly can, working over and above very often, and we support the team with that. So I think capacity wise, yes, there is sufficient capacity, but we do keep a review of that constantly.
Okay, it'll be interesting reading when all the schools submit their draft budgets by the 1st of May, I think, the target date.
Yes.
I know I'm pretty certain that the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee, as well as this committee, would be extremely interested in getting an early snapshot of those draft budgets. Would that be possible? Not individual schools maybe, but the overall trend and to see the effectiveness of this intervention.
We would be able to share the plans that we had previously, where we've worked with schools, and we can show that improvement on recovery plans. Of course, now that the budget packs are going out, that does change things slightly. And I know in terms of forward projections, we have issued packs that show a flat uplift in future years based on the information that's coming through at a national level. So schools will have to then work through that and bring those plans back. I will say the first snapshot from schools is not where we end up. Schools reluctantly, I think, don't address perhaps what they're seeing as soon as sometimes they could, but we have to work with schools then to put those plans in place. So I would be reluctant to share things until we get those governing body returns back and we know what schools are working to, because I don't think it will be a realistic picture the first snapshot that you get.
Okay, yeah, and as before, my concern is also with those that do have a surplus deficit, because there will be no focus on those at all.
We do have a look at surpluses as well, because in terms of the scheme for financing schools, anybody holding a significant surplus, there are rules in place as well.
No, I was thinking of the use of that surplus.
Okay.
use of that surplus. So anyway, we can keep an eye on this going forward. And thank you, Councillor Jeremy. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, no problem. Firstly, can I say on schools, the problem is the fair funding formula doesn't work. I've been saying this for years. The problem is it gives the same amount per head for child for education. Education is the product. Problem is some schools have brand new buildings, so they don't have the same costs of keeping the property in good condition. And therefore, we need to separate education, the cost of education out, and separate the other part out and give proportionately to the condition of the buildings. And it's just never going to work the way it is at the moment. Just can't have one thing to fit all. That was just what I was going to say there. And the other thing was on housing. We show housing that we're having this large deficit, but we've actually got housing that is due to the demolition, yet it's showing as empty voids, which it obviously is. So it's showing as a deficit on the budget. I don't believe that makes any sense. I think if properties are earmarked for demolition, they should be taken out because it actually gives a false picture to what's going on.
Jeremy, which paragraph are you on?
Well, I'm on the housing, on the cost reduction. I am.
Oh, the cost reduction. Oh, sorry, it's gone down to the service, the appendices.
And it just shows that they got 51% there. But what I'm saying to you is that some of the houses are earmarked for demolition then to be rebuilt on. And I don't understand why we've got properties which are earmarked for demolition shown as empty voids, because they're not eligible to be let. And I think we just need to look at that because it doesn't give the proper understanding of what our empty voids are. Does that make sense? Hopefully I can.
Thank you, Jeremy. Jane, can you just quickly address the school funding formula? There's an element there for condition on school, isn't there?
There is. I mean, the school's funding formula is reviewed almost annually, I think, at the moment, and that does go through then the approval process through the schools forum, the scrutiny committee, and then formally signed off by cabinet. So it is, as I said, reviewed quite regularly. There is an element within it that allocates funding based on the condition of the school and the buildings and the floor area. So we do take consideration of those condition factors in the funding that is allocated. And then, of course, schools can draw through the school service. There is a major improvement fund as well that supports schools annually through that basis. So I wouldn't agree with you, Councillor Jeremy, in terms of your view on the funding formula, but I'm more than happy to go through it in detail with you so that you could see the different elements that do impact differently on schools. So it does very much depend on the type of school, what the school is delivering, be it dual stream or individual language or whatever. There are various factors within the formula that does allocate funding specifically on what that school is delivering. So, but more than happy to go through that in detail with you at any time.
Oh, I'm happy with that. I just think that we should be given an amount for education, which is specifically earmarked for education, because a lot of schools with poor campuses are using educational money to prop up holes in the roof, buckets to catch the water, like Glanbrindod campus, and it doesn't give a fair reflection. And some of the youngsters are missing out on what education they should have because the money is having to be put the other way, and we're not showing. There's no way then of us identifying where we're not funding appropriately because it's all in one big mash. And I think education should be funded separately, campus should be funded on the other behind it, and then we'd be able to see where the failing is on each of these campuses, because it's so difficult. We had a meeting before where we had a joint meeting between finance and audit, and we're getting figures. No one's got a clue. We don't know whether they're investing. All of a sudden, the school could be investing to save. Now, if they're building a new block or doing something which is going to save money in 2 or 3 years, unless we understand that picture, all we're getting is a load of figures, no understanding at all of that school and their campus. And it's just a waste of time doing it, to be perfectly honest. You need to understand the story to be able to have an end to it. So that's all I'm going to say on that one.
Thank you, Jeremy. You can, as Jane has offered, to catch up with you on that and the health board issues as well. The housing element, Jane, that Councillor Jeremy mentioned.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Councillor. I think you're referring to council houses and the estates. I'm not sure that that saving relates specifically to voids. I don't know the detail of the savings there that are being delivered by the housing service. But in terms of the HRA, it is a ring-fenced element in the council. So the HRA do draw from reserves or put into reserves on an annual basis. It is a ring-fenced account in terms of the financial elements of that. The savings on here would relate to the Housing and Community Development Service as a whole, not the HRA. So it wouldn't include any voids or anything like that. That is very much within the HRA itself.
Can I say, I'm not referring to the savings. What I'm referring to, the void show was empty and not having any rent against them. So it actually shows that we're having £1 million of empty voids a year. Well, these properties aren't eligible to be rented. They're going to be knocked down. They shouldn't be in that budget, and it needs to be a way to take them out of that so it doesn't give a disproportionate thing of where we're going.
Well, they have to stay in there, I'm afraid, because that is part of the HRA regulations. So, you know, if they're not receiving rent at that point in time, then the voids clearly have to stay within the housing revenue account.
Well, can I say that they should be shown as a separate entity, and there should be an explanation, because again, it doesn't tell the picture and it doesn't tell the story. And in business, you need to know exactly where we're going. This gives a disproportionate. Everyone's saying outside £1 million in lost rents. This is absolutely ridiculous. But 200,000 of that might be down to properties which are waiting to be knocked down, and it needs to be shown in a way that people can understand. Even people like me, Jane, who are not the sharpest on the spreadsheet.
I'm not meant to say in a word.
Possibly, Councillor Jeremy, could you take that up with the chair of the ERCG? Housing falls under their remit, really. Perhaps just drop a note or have a conversation with the chair of the ERCG, and she could probably follow it up for you.
Okie doke then.
Or even head of housing, possibly. Gareth.
Yeah, morning. Yeah, just on table 2 cost reductions and the unachieved. Children's services are £500,000, highways transport recycles £500,000, and in 3.4 it says last line, opportunity to reduce spend and bring the targets back on track at diminishing. And also you've got property planning and public protection, 200,000. So there's 1.2 million there, or almost 1.3 million. 7% of the cost reductions are behind target with no assurance. Are we able to have a little bit more information on that? And then I got another question after.
There is more information, Councillor Gareth, in the individual sections in appendix. Let me get which one it is.
There's a bit of a narrative.
It's appendix B. So each head of service does put some commentary in those sections around the undelivered savings. So I'll let you have a look at that first before I sort of repeat what's there. And if you've got further questions, come back to us.
Okay, right, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted, are you happy with what you're being told is achievable? That's what I'm basically trying to get to. You know, it's easy to put stuff in reports that we can do, but I think there needs to be some scrutiny around what is there. And are you confident as a financial officer that these, you know, they are there? Because yes, it's all well and good, but actually action to get these in place. We're 3 months towards the end of the year, Q3. Yeah. You know, we're going to the last quarter. Are you confident that actually this 1.2 unachieved, identified, that they have got a robust plan in place? Because, you know, we're already, you know, towards the end of February, we've only got March to go. So it's a loaded question I'm asking you, I'm afraid, Jane, as you know it would be. You know, are we actually within that? That's what I'm basically trying to get to in a polite way. Okay.
Shall I pick up on that then? Because
yes, please, if you can.
Yeah. So looking at the table, there's 2 columns there. One is assured. So I have more concern that services are telling me they can deliver 3.7 million in the last 3 months of the year. And I did challenge the directors and the heads of service around that. And each service has come back to me again and assured me that they can deliver that by the year end. So that gives me some more comfort that we can achieve what they're saying they can achieve. But there is, as I said, that level of risk there. In terms of the 1.2 million, so those 3 service areas there that you mentioned, that will not be delivered by year end. And services are trying as best they can to reduce that, but I have factored that non-delivery into this forecast. So some of that will be delivered in the new financial year. So there may be some delays in terms of delivery, and that will be forthcoming in the 24-25. And I think we have removed some of those that definitely can't be delivered as part of the budget plan for next year. So I think looking at both factors, I'm comfortable with where we are, and the forecast reflects that.
And sorry, Gareth, just to chip in there, they will have been reflected in last Thursday's budget decisions, won't
Yes.
they? Well, of that 1.2, how much has been written out, and how much is going to be delivered in the next
Let me
financial
have
year?
a double check, and it's not all of it. I know it's definitely not all of it, but I'll have a quick look now at the budget plan that was approved, and I'll come back to you.
And the rest of it, the risk budget will have to cover the rest of the stuff that's not delivered in this financial year, won't it?
It will, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Gareth, go on.
Okay, now my even more loaded question. OD workforce, the 20,000 reduction. Let's be realistic, the state of the economy across the whole country, the world itself, and the reductions that we're looking to make, staff workforce is going to be one of the ones in the future we will be looking at, because we can't keep the work levels of staff that we've got there. If we keep on reducing workforce and organisation development departments, that's going to be key in resetting the authority as we look at possible reductions of staff, or if staff move and the organisation changes to deliver savings and reforms and reorganisations of services. If that's not in place, we're not going to be able to deliver the savings that the council need. It's a hard question to say that I'm not talking about mass redundancies, but let's be realistic. As the budgets are getting tighter, people are part of that. We can't keep on taking money out the budgets and cutting services, but still have the staff that are here. So where are we around the workforce organisation development? Only the 20,000 within there, and you've been assured the 17. Is that realistically, are we taking too much out the central services to allow us to achieve our savings at the end?
It's a good point. And I absolutely agree. We need to ensure that we have that corporate capacity to deliver on sustainable powers across all of those areas, in terms of engagement, finance, workforce and OD, digital. All of those services are going to be the drivers of change across the organisation. Each of those services are delivering some savings in the current year, but when we've proposed the budget to Cabinet and Council for next year, we've been very mindful we need to protect that resource to deliver that change. So I'm comfortable. I think initially some of those services had put higher levels of reductions. Once we've understood the impact of that around being able to deliver what we need, they have been removed from that proposal. So I think at the moment we are mindful that we need those services, and we have protected them to some degree at the moment. Not being said, in the future you may well see further reductions come through, but at the present time they are very much needed to deliver that change.
Thank you. If I just come back, yeah, they are to deliver the change, but also not just the change, the general management is my main concern, because if we can't general the management, we're talking multi-million pounds here that we're asking officers to deal with on a day-to-day basis and manage. And as you can see within the report here, we're talking just in this section, the cost reduction is 17 million to be achieved. And obviously we go into next year's budget, some of the 1.2 is rolling over. We need to be able to managers who can deliver these services. Otherwise we are just going on and on again and rewarding failure. And I don't say that nicely in that way. So for me, it's just, have we got the systems in place within the OD and workforce to be able to manage the authority going forward? So if we do slip up, it's dealt with in a timely manner, in a nice way. That sounded bad then.
Thank you, Gareth. just thought what would really be useful would be just from the cost reductions, almost another column with the page number saying where the service commentary is in the appendix, so I'm zooming up and down the various papers, and it's causing difficulty. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It was just a quick question around the risk budget, actually. So see lots of mention of the risk budget there, but to a degree, I guess we've only got £3 million in the risk budget, and it always sort of seems to come up as being the saviour if we overspend on certain areas or go past their budgets. But of course, we can only spend it once. Is there like a schedule somewhere, Jane, that says there's the 3 million, and at the moment I might potentially need that bit, and that bit for something, and so we've an idea of sort of how much is left of that risk budget?
Yeah, I think if you look at Appendix A, the table there shows that use of risk funding to cover unfunded pressures. So you can see there that you've got two elements drawn from reserves for adults and not from reserves, from the risk budget, sorry, for adults and children's. And then you've got the corresponding opposite entry against corporate activity. So that shows you where services have already had approval to draw on that risk budget. Otherwise, I think there is some commentary later on that explains how much of that budget is left and is therefore available to cover off any remaining risk that is highlighted through the next quarter.
So is that table telling me then we've sort of earmarked 1,524,000?
Yes.
So roughly
Yeah.
we've got 1.5 million left. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Good morning, Lynn.
Good morning, Councillor Allard. I hope it's okay if I ask a question.
Yes, please.
My
Yeah.
theme's really around assurance and governance and how this works, and probably picking up a wee bit of Councillor Gareth's earlier theme around the 1.2. My thoughts here, Jane, Councillor Allard, Chair, are really around the relationship, if any, the relationship between the 0.9 million undelivered last year and the 1.2 million that's unlikely to be delivered this year, and really to understand if there's any relationship between them and how that's dealt with by official officers. And the other thing that I'm really curious about, and Jane, this might be obvious and I could have missed it, is the extent to which the savings are recurrent and non-recurrent, and is there a mix of recurrent and non-recurrent savings, because that's quite important for future planning. And I think it may be helpful to colleagues if future versions of this paper helped colleagues to understand recurrent and non-recurrent savings, especially in the light of the current challenges facing Powys and the wider public sector. And the other thing I was wondering about was run rate analysis, and if you use run rate analysis to challenge colleagues that seem to be underperforming in terms of savings delivery, and are there this might sound a bit mean, but is there a group of the kind of usual suspects? You know, do you know where there are going to be delivery problems with particular services that you get to Q4 and they've still got a really significant proportion of their savings to deliver? And from a process and governance point of view, it would be good to understand what work is done with services by senior officers in a kind of challenge and scrutiny and seeking assurance to areas where the run rate is not giving you confidence, and where there may be optimism bias, and where they leave savings to late in Q3 or in Q4, and then, you know, to be slightly pejorative, go, oh, it's too late, we can't do it. And just wondering what your approach to that kind of theme is. Thank you, Councillor Allard, for letting me ask the question.
Quite right. Jane and could possibly come in on this, but also David. Good morning, David. Thank you for joining us. But possibly you could come in after Jane and explain the challenge that the Cabinet have given them when these savings were put forward in the first place. But Jane first.
Okay, so there was two parts of that. One was about which of the savings were recurrent and which weren't. So the majority are recurrent, but there are some where it is potentially a one-year saving, and what you see within the individual service FRMs, but also the overarching FRM, if anything is not recurrent, you will see that immediate pressure fall into the second year of our plan. So we're very clear about which ones are permanent reductions and which ones are temporary, if you like, in terms of that, so that we can track that through and make sure we cover it off each year. In terms of delivery of savings, CLT review these quarterly reports ahead of them going to anywhere else. And as part of that challenge in those CLT forums, we challenge the directors around their performance for their services. And of course, they then pick up through SLT as well when we speak to heads of service and challenge. So that challenge is constant, both in terms of the delivery of the budget, but also the delivery of savings. These financial reports then go to scrutiny as well. So those would be more at a service level. And again, scrutiny can challenge the heads of service and the managers throughout that process. When it comes to budget setting for future years, we are very clear to look at what savings are not going to be delivered. And for the robustness of the budget in year 2, we remove them if we feel it's appropriate to do so. And Craig has actually just checked how much of the savings we've taken out in terms of the budget proposal. So I'll ask Craig to just come in and confirm that figure. He's got that there for us. But I can assure you there is an awful lot of challenge that goes in on both aspects of that.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, Craig.
Good morning, all. Yes, in the budget that went to Council on Thursday, you will note there was £353,000 of the cost reductions identified for 23-24 that were written out of the budget.
Can you tell us which one that was?
HTR, and on page on page 23 of the report in the heads of service narrative, you can see then the commentary around public transport, and that was the saving that was written out from the 24-25 budget.
Thank you very much, Craig. And David, I don't know whether you want to reinforce the challenge that the individual cabinet members and the cabinet as a whole give the directors around saving delivery and performance in general, really.
Well, as Jane says, Chair, these are monitored on a quarterly basis and that they're challenged on a regular basis. But initially, when the budget is being set, these savings are put forward. We discuss them with heads of service, with CLT, etc., and we do get assurances that the majority of the savings are realistic and are deliverable. But that said, I think you have to accept that by the very nature of some of these savings, they are going to be impacted by factors that we might not be aware of at the time that they actually set them. And I think children's services is a perfect example, where demand can change so very, very quickly, and that in turn can impact projected savings delivery. But you can be sure that they are challenged. But as I say, when in the initial process, when we're setting it up, we have to take the word of the heads of service that they are deliverable.
Thank you very much, David. If nobody else got a question, I'd just like to comment on the can't remember the number now. Where was it? 11.9, well, almost £12 million of underspends. It's a significant amount of money that underspends. So in theory, there's a budget there. The money was allocated to a service to deliver something. So obvious question is, what wasn't delivered? There's £12 million worth of services undelivered, and what's that impact on the residents?
Okay, so You're absolutely right. When you look at table 1, it does show significant levels of underspends. These can be for all sorts of reasons. Again, there is some narrative in Appendix B as to what's generated those underspends at each service level. So I'm not going to go through each of those, but that's there. For me, though, that was one of the key questions in terms of delivering on the budget. You also see cost pressures. So it's important that services do flex their budgets, and where they see underspends to offset those pressures, then they would maintain that. But for myself as well, the first question I always ask when I see underspends is that factored into next year's budget already? And yes, they are. So, you know, a budget is an estimate when it comes down to it. You factor in most of what you know at that point in time, but there are always some unknowns. But I can assure you that where any of those cost underspends are recurrent and can be taken out, they have already been reflected in those budgets for next year that were approved by council on Thursday. So yeah, it's an important factor though to note and understand what they are, why they're there, and whether we can then reap the benefit from those in future years. And
just to add to that slightly, there are some overachievements there as well. I'm surprising. I better not say this, but when Councillor Peat is listening, but there was an overachievement of 407k in car park charges, and I obviously I assume those have been worked into the next year's budget, so there will, in theory, if it, like for like, there shouldn't be an overachievement in the next year's budget, should there? But a lot of these are staff posts as well, and you have to ask, you know, what. There's clearly sometimes a mismatch between the budget and the service delivery, but anyway, leave that to one side. But just a quick comment on the HCR commentary. There's an overspend of 407 on highway routine and maintenance structure, and then there's where's it? There's an underspending, you know, they've got a list of overspends and they've got a list of underspends as well. How flexible are you in the service? Do those sort of issues have to come back to Cabinet for environments between the two areas? If they're over 100k, they have to come back to Cabinet, do they? Even if they're within one service area?
Yeah, if they're within the service area but in different areas, so say you've got staffing and contractors as an example, then yes, environments are requested. If it's a change to the budget as approved, environment is required, and the thresholds for that are stipulated within the financial reg. So depending on where they are across the service, then those environments would need to be actioned, and everything, I think, as you said, I've got to get my thresholds right, I think it's 125,000, anything above that would need to go to Cabinet, and then everything over 500,000 would need to go to council.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jane. Any other questions on this revenue? Oh, Karina.
Sorry, a naive question in a way, but why are underspends a bad thing? They seem to be costly. It's money that you haven't been able to act, because quite often you haven't been able to recruit people, and sometimes you divert the underspends to the capital stuff that you're going to do later to avoid high interest rates currently, as far as I can see. But they seem to be costly to maintain the underspends. I don't know.
I think it depends what the underspend is for. It can be costly because if you can't recruit and you can't deliver the service, then they could be costly from that perspective. But the overspends and the underspends against services in those tables are not necessarily intrinsically linked. So no, underspends can be good as well, for all of the reasons that you stated. So I'm not sure they come through as being particularly costly, but I may have misunderstood what you're saying, so apologies if I have. They
seem to be a bad thing when I read through the papers. I would have thought they were, yeah.
I think it's understanding why they're there. They're a bad thing if they've been built into the budget knowing that they were going to be underspends, then that's bad. But obviously, if you can deliver better, more cost effectively, then in that aspect they are good. But it's always worth knowing what they are and understanding them to assess them, really.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor David, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you got any overall comments. We kicked off before you arrived, really. What's your assessment?
I was just going to add to this particular part of the debate with regard to underspends on staff vacancies. I think we have to accept that going forward, we're in a changing world, a highly technical and digital world, and there's a strong possibility that some of the vacancies we're actually holding, because of the change in the way we do things, they might not be required in future. Well, on that basis, obviously, I think, as Karina says, that an underspend means that we're simply progressing and using all the technology and all the digital avenues that are available to us, and we can deliver things at less cost, and that's got to be a good thing for the authority. So they shouldn't be seen as being negatives, but I think it's essential to understand them. But that said, yes, I am late. I apologise for that. Monday morning, 9 o'clock isn't I've got a regular appointment between 8 and 9, unfortunately, every week. So I can't. By the time I get back here, it's perhaps 9. Now, I think, as far as the outturn, the revenue outturn's concerned, it's better than was anticipated originally. I think there's a lot of challenge still remaining for the year as we go forward, and I think we're in a pretty strong position at the moment to actually face up and deliver a balanced budget at year end. But I don't think we should get carried away and think that, wow, everything's rosy. We've got this significant underspend, and we should start thinking already about where we should be allocating that. But significant challenge does remain. I'm sure you've already had that discussion, but that's my overarching opinion on it.
Thank you. Yes, David. Thank you for those comments. Just in a way, if there's a change in service delivery, that those posts shouldn't have been in the budget in the first place. But things don't change that quickly within a sort of 12-month period. And clearly, there's some areas of council who face significantly more pressure than other areas. I know it's a matter of degrees, but it's important that the resources allocated.
But I think, Chair, with respect, if you're actually working on a change management program, and we're going to see a lot of this in the future, then there has to be a fallback position, because sometimes the change you're actually looking for doesn't particularly work, and you have to fall back on the old way of doing things. So if that accommodation is already in the budget, then you're not going to actually put extra pressure on a budget. And once you know that particular change you're applying is working, then that's the time to remove it from the budget. So I don't think that's a problem in itself. As long as it doesn't remain there indefinitely, obviously, then it becomes a problem. But
thank you, David. Jane, you had your hand.
Yeah, only to add to that, because sometimes you will see underspends based on staff vacancies, but you will also see a significant pressure against agency staff to support those posts. So it's just bearing that in mind as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jane. With that, we'll move on to the capital outturn. If only my laptop would move to it. David, do you want to give a quick overview on how it's progressing on the? Yes, I've got to it now. Yes, if you'd like to give a quick overview, please.
I've got some notes here. I can just do a brief introduction, Chair. So this is the capital focus for 23-24 as at 31st December 2023. So the report provides an update on the financial position of the Council's capital programme. Following the successful award of additional grants and the reprofiling of budgets between the financial years, the revised programme for 23-24 is budgeted at £80.45 million. At the end of Q3, actual spend amounts to £38.47 million, representing 48% of the total budget. an increase of £15.62 million since that reported at Q2. 36% or £29.34 million of the capital expenditure is budgeted to be financed by borrowing. The interest cost for this, as we're aware, is charged to the revenue account. Looking at the report, section 3 of the report details the grants that have been received and included in the capital programme. Section 4 sets out some reprofiling of a budget between financial years following a review of the capital programme by all services. These were included in the capital programme approved by Council last week. £1.86 million of capital receipts has been received so far this financial year, and further sales have been agreed to the value of £0.53 million, with a further £0.28 million for the HRA. At this stage, it's expected that sales totaling £2.57 million could be achieved this financial year. Any delays in the selling process may see some receipts being received in the next financial year. So that's a very brief overview of the capital report, Chair.
Thank you, David. And Jane, do you wish to add anything? Shall we open up for questions? I know Gareth wants to pick up on something. Come on, Gareth.
No, happy to go to questions.
Councillor Gareth Ratcliffe, that is.
Yeah, sorry. I lost my train of thought then. I just answered another email. Yes. You're
looking at the underspend of the capital programme.
Yes, capital programme underspend. Sorry, I need to. You caught me, Aled. I was looking at something else. Right. Yeah, no, that's no problem. I raised it earlier. Yeah, just the capital underspends and remaining budgets. We've got some that are around the 50% mark. Environments and everything rolling over, where are these projects? Are we able to have an understanding of where we're going to be with them? Because we're talking around 50%, which is just short of £41 million in the remaining budget. How do these get handled? How are they handed over for environments? Are projects still going? Just a little bit of understanding around these actual budgets that are remaining.
Shall I pick up on that? I won't have the detail. I have
to say. I don't expect you to have detail, but I don't. It's just the assurances I'm looking for.
Yes, yeah.
I can see in table 2 the as David outlined, really, you can see some of it talks about environments, but it's not really environments, is it? Or is it just pushed into the next financial year? Jane?
It will depend. I think where they require formal approval through the environment process, obviously you see those featured in the quarterly reports anyway, don't you? But for reprofiling as well, again, there's a mention in here about the significant reprofiling. I mean, the nature of capital projects, as you all know, they can be for a number of years. And although we estimate to our best guess, if you like, in terms of what will be spent in which year, things do happen that dictate that profile being changed. I think we're getting better at profiling across the services, and we keep pushing that, and we still think there's some way to go to get it absolutely spot on. But being clear about the profile, in particular the bigger projects across years, is vital. And I think you will see when you saw the capital programme approved at Council on Thursday, there is a significant level of reprofiling into next year and the future years for some of these projects due to delays, due to tendering delays. Where on some of the larger scale projects, we've had to review prices that have come in if they're not appropriate and really look to see how we can bring those costs down for some as well. There was also, to some degree, some delays put in because of the borrowing rates at this point in time as well, where we know we can get those borrowing. It's expected to come down in future years. We're keeping a keen eye on that as well. So again, the assurance is there. We have a capital oversight board that keeps a track on that as well. We review through that projects and challenge services there as well, and they go through that formal framework in terms of any capital projects as well to make sure that, one, the revenue costs are fully included when you consider a capital project at the outset. We review the spend, whether it's appropriate for the buildings we hold, particularly aligned now with sustainable powers in our building rationalisation. You know, we don't want to be spending money now on buildings we may not have in the future. So there's quite a degree of challenge that goes on in the background here. And I know Gareth Hall has been involved in a capital working group through Governance and Audit Committee, where they've looked in detail and challenged us quite heavily, I think, through that to get some more assurance from that perspective as well. So I don't know if Gareth wants to comment on the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Jane. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Radcliffe?
Thank you very much. I think Gareth, yeah, I know it's confusing. Not very often to get two Gareths in the same room. Yeah, no, I think for me, when you see reprofiling, and what do you actually mean by reprofiling? One of the things I found being in the council so many years, we use words, you know, we talk about affordable housing and there's so many definitions. We talk about, you know, co-production, so many definitions. And when we talk about reprofiling, it may mean slightly different to me. So when we talk about reprofiling, what does it actually mean to the council? Sorry to be pedantic, but it is just one of those. In my head, I had two things: reprofiling, oh, we'll put the money elsewhere, and then you went in assessment, everything else. That just so when we use that word, what is it? Yeah.
Okay, so let me give you a very simple example. So if you've got a capital project that is running across 2 years, so say we plan to spend 100,000 in year one and 100,000 in year two. If there's delays in that project and there's more spend going to be in year two than year one, we would reprofile, say, 50,000 from year one and add it to year two. So when we're reprofiling, it is only on that specific project, and it is the timing of spend. So reprofiling isn't about moving between projects, it's purely on that individual project.
That's really helpful, and that comes into my last question is, so when you reprofile and move into year two or year three or year whatever, how many of these projects for capital spend are actually behind? Because I think that puts an impact on the council and spend, because we spend officers are still working on these projects. It still impacts the council finances. It's not within the capital, but it's in the day-to-day running. So it would be interesting to understand how many of these projects are beyond their time frame of originally planned, because it still puts a financial impact on the authority, on the day-to-day running, because we've got an officer who's running a project that's overrun, that's taken them away from their day job, which is obviously impacting other parts of the council and savings and underspends and delivering the day job. So it's just a little bit of understanding. And I don't expect you just to answer that question, but it would be nice to know, because it is one of those detailed things. It would be nice to know, well, actually, you know, we've got all this capital project funds that we want to spend on these, you know, these lovely projects, and we go to residents and that's lovely, but actually if we're not delivering it, it is still financial impact elsewhere in the council. So it'd be helpful to understand where these projects are, because I've heard of projects, you know, whispers that have been there for years that have never been completed. Well, if that's the case, why are we still doing them if they're not going to be delivered?
No, it's a very valid point, and you could have some projects, of course, that delayed, that they're then not delivering the savings that we expected. So, you know, there is, again, we do challenge that quite heavily through the Capital Oversight Board, and I think to get into the detail, I would refer the scrutiny committees to be mindful of that, because you can then focus on the individual service areas rather than trying to pick it up here, you know, across the whole programme. You can get into much more detail at the scrutiny. So it's something I'll pick up to make sure that's covered at some of those scrutiny sessions as well.
And just to add that, it's not just the impact on the financials of the council, it's about service delivery as well to the residents, you know. It's vital the capital programme goes forward and on time. And before I bring Gareth in, this reprofiling, how much has that saved the revenue account? Because there's significant saving by delaying capital programmes. There's quite a saving on borrowing, isn't there? Is that part of the motivation or not?
I think we had COVID period, we saw inflation really running high, and I think during that time we were more cautious with projects because they were costing so much. But it's keeping an eye then on what's happening with borrowing rates and inflation. You know, we're not seeing inflation being negative, are we? Their costs are still going up.
No.
So I think you do just keep an eye on that. In terms of borrowing, it's hard to calculate that against capital projects because we borrow daily for general cash management anyway. So it is hard to nail down exactly what that saving might be because the timing isn't that specific. It's quite fluid. So it's just bearing that in mind. What we do, of course, though, is borrow over shorter term when interest rates are quite high on that longer term borrowing. So we would borrow shorter, more regularly for a period of time to get to those lower rates that we hope to see in the future.
But I guess you do an assessment at year end, don't you, about total interest charges on the revenue account?
And you will see that in the revenue account, won't you, where we've had a budget set and how we've performed against it.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Gareth, through audit and governance, you did a bit of work on this through a working group.
Yes, and in fact, we had a working group meeting last week, Chair, where there was a very full and wide-ranging discussion with Jane and other officers on the whole capital programme and how it's managed. We received clarification on a whole series of working practices which we weren't familiar with, which were quite enlightening. That and our recommendations are going to go to a final report of the working group, which has been prepared over the next week. And Chair, once that's signed off by the Audit and Governance Committee, I can bring it to the finance panel.
It'd be great to see that, even if it's just for information. So thank you very much, Gareth. I'd appreciate that. And any other comments on this, the capital program?
Can I just say, Chair, I take your point about monitoring the savings against the revenue account with regard to borrowing for the capital program, but I think it's absolutely essential as well that we recognise that we want to see responsible financial management as well, because on the other side of the coin, what we don't want to do is go out there and start borrowing at artificially high levels of interest, because that could have an absolutely disastrous impact, on the revenue account in the long term. So I think we've got to recognise, that our accountants are doing an incredibly good job at the moment. They're actually monitoring this situation and keeping the borrowing cost down as low as possible.
Yes, we thank you, David. We do have a really strong treasury management team in the council, and they're worth their weight in gold. So thanks to Jane and her team for that. Councillor Jeremy.
I don't know whether this is the right place, but personally, I'd like to see something which shows within our budget what we've overspent on contracts. We don't ever seem to get a report back on how our contract management is going. And I think that we're looking at making savings, and the amount of savings for me that could be made through properly run contracts is massive. Another one is the cost of consultants and etc., whatever every other name we call them. I'd like to see a cost of them, and I'd like to see how they are broken down, each of these, like when we haven't got enough social workers and we bring people in. I'd just like to see what these costs actually are impacting on the council, so then we can see where there are realistic savings that can be made without cutting back on services and without getting rid of staff as well. So I don't know, that was my point I'd like to bring.
Thank you, Jeremy. I know we do have sort of outcome reports on various projects. I don't know if any have been completed recently or not in the last 12 months or not, but it would be interesting to have a quick overview of some of those projects. Clearly, there will be changes as projects go along, because possibly the spec at the front end wasn't as it should be, but. The point around social workers, is that more for the individual scrutiny committee? I know they're very aware of the extra costs that involves.
But what I'm trying to say is, if we had an understanding of what this was costing us, consultants coming in to look at putting battery vehicles in, into Powys when there's no capacity in the Mid Wales lines. It's no matter what consultant you bring in, unless you're going to upgrade the Mid Wales lines, it's not going to be there. And all these consultants are huge costs. How many consultants do we have now at the moment? How long? A little bit of a rationale, not identifying, but how long have they been there? And as we grow our own, like they're doing with the social workers, which is a fantastic way of doing it, we would be able to see the results, because we'd be able to see the amount getting less each year that we spend on bringing people in at high cost. And I think there's money to be saved there without actually going at frontline services. And I think we don't understand them costs. And personally, I think there should be a little paragraph in there which itemizes all that, so we have a good understanding.
David or Jane, would you wish to comment on that?
I mean, we get asked about consultants all of the time, as you can imagine. So we very often have freedom of information requests. We were trying to publish that data so that we don't necessarily have to respond then, because it's out there. But I'm sure we can pull together anything, you know. We have that detail. Services understand what they're spending in those areas. In some times, consultants are more cost effective because we don't necessarily have the skills in the organisation for some things. But I think it's important to understand all of that. As you say, Councillor Jeremy, it's good to have that oversight. So we'll see. We can provide a report that shows all the consultancy costs incurred in the last year. That's no problem. We can do that straightforwardly. And I can speak to Wayne on the contracts and see if there's anything we can pull together to give that information more readily for members to see as well.
Can I just say on the contracts, they'll have a scale where they go in year. Even if it's a 2-year project, they'll know whether the project is run within budget for that year. What I don't like is when people say, well, the project hasn't finished, and then we get a big lump at the end. I'd rather people be truthful and upfront, so that we got an understanding and we can start to look at where we can say. And I'm not against consultants when they're needed, but when we get people paid very handsomely and they're not making decisions and bringing consultants in so that they don't carry any weight of that decision making, I find that poor. And if people can't make them decisions in their positions, they have to question whether they're the right person to be in that position. And this is why I'd like to see a simple breakdown of consultants in which areas, not going into detail. You know, there's 4 or 5 different areas of the council, and we can understand there. And yes, we are going to need consultants, definitely 100%. But the management of them consultants is also got to be for the senior management to make sure it's kept in line. Thank you.
Thank you much, and thank you, Jane, for the offer of the feedback on those 2 particular areas. Thank you. Karina.
Hello. And another basic question. It's the difference between supported borrowing and prudential borrowing. Is prudential borrowing more about the assets that we hold, a sort of speculation, element of speculation there?
James would probably tell me off if I don't get the terminology spot on. Yeah. But prudential borrowing or supported borrowing is exactly the same type of borrowing when you actually borrow in the funds, but we get an allocation of money through the revenue settlement
from Welsh Government.
Yeah, that actually supports some of that borrowing cost. So that's what we call supported borrowing. But when the council is borrowing and funding itself from the general pot, then that is more what we call prudential borrowing. It's specific terminology, but that's roughly the difference between the two.
Is that on the basis of assets we hold?
It would cover all assets. So it's not a distinction between the asset itself. It's the means by which we fund the borrowing.
And because I was having a conversation this morning, and you know, if we're selling off our assets, we're getting smaller. Does that mean we have less borrowing power?
No.
Okay.
Our borrowing isn't dictated by, very often in a business, your borrowing is dictated by the assets you hold, but in local government, it's not. Our borrowing is covered, or our borrowing requirement is factored through our capital spend, not the assets we hold. it's different regime in terms of local government, and I know it's difficult for a lot of, it's difficult to understand that when it's so much routine in the private world.
And in local government, a keen eye is kept on the cost of the borrowing in relationship to the net budget. I'm not sure what the percentage is now. Is about between 8 and 10%.
No, it's more like 3.94%.
3.9.
But that's what the
Okay.
prudential indicators do.
Oh,
There
yeah,
is a
okay.
whole suite of prudential indicators that show that affordability and all of those factors in terms of monitoring that. And again, council sets those on an annual basis, and then we have to comply and stay within those limits.
Okay. Yeah. No. Come to think about it, a few years ago there was an upward trend within
It was
that figure, wasn't it?
forecast to go, yeah.
Forecast, and that was the cause of concern. No, thank you, Jane. Karina, are you happy to explain that to all your residents, the difference between prudential and supported? But it's about, if Welsh Government is keen on a certain area, they want investment in that area, they will help the council through supported borrowing, and it's about Welsh Government pushing for their objectives as well. So thank you for the question, Karina. And any other comments on this capital report at all? No? Brilliant. Thank you very much. It always tends to be quite a lot of adjustment in the last quarters, doesn't it, with these capital projects? Sadly, but that's.
Hoping it's getting better.
Okay.
We'll see.
We'll see. We do have that comment every year, don't we? So, no, it is gradually getting better. I mustn't say otherwise, really. So thank you very much, Jane, and your team, and Craig. So that's where we're at for this. Oh no, sorry, apologies. We got the forward work program on item 7. If we could have a quick look at that. Ooh, a lot of stuff's been right. There's quite a lot of old stuff in here as well, that needs to be refreshed, really. But zooming down to 2024, you've got the self-assessment stuff on the 11th of March, more on sustainable powers in end of April, and then obviously towards the AGM, and the Q4 reports for this current financial year will be in July, which feels a very long way off at the moment. Okay. Any comments on the forward work program? No. Just going back to the overall, well, the two main areas, the revenue and the capital. What do we want to come out of this meeting? Jane has said, responded positively to Jeremy Pugh's request around consultants, and there's 2 elements to that, wasn't there, Jane? I can't remember what they were now. Consultants and the other one. Yeah, and and I wish to go back to school budgets as well. I can see Mary's in the in the meeting now. There was an element of reluctance from your part, Jane, about looking too soon at the draft budgets when they come in at the beginning of May. But I'm quite keen to have an early view of that, not individual schools, but just to understand the pressure. Even if it's in confidential session, I'd be quite keen to have an early view of the overall picture that that information has produced, because it is a significant area of risk for the council going forward. There's quite a high level of potential deficits in that area, so I'm quite keen to have a early view of that. Perhaps we can take that discussion outside.
Okay.
Any other, Karina, any other things arising from today's meeting?
I'm sorry, I was just thinking about the forward work programme.
Oh, okay, sorry.
What
Trina.
sort of self-assessment are you requiring? That's all.
We did it last year. Kath, would
Yeah.
you want to chip in
Yes, Chair. Councillor Carina, every year, each of the scrutiny committees, panels and regulatory committees have to do a self-assessment. So therefore, we have to see where you are, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, etc., etc. And then that will feed into the corporate self-assessment.
Does that cover training?
It covers every element that you want it to, yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you for jogging my memory there, Carina. Training is essential for councillors. We were having quite a bit of, or we're going to have quite intensive training from Chris Tidswell of the SIPFA, and that fell by the wayside to some degree to help improve councillors' understanding of the finances of the council. Is there any, has further thought been given to that?
That was just before COVID, I think,
I
wasn't
know,
it? It was
yes,
going back a while. I
exactly.
don't know if Chris actually works for SIPFA anymore. I think we were hoping to do something a bit more detailed and specific through the scrutiny sessions. But I haven't really considered that lately. So it's probably something I need to just think about more generally and see what we need to do.
Yeah, we have mentioned it in this committee before, and I think I'd certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure other councillors would as well. Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. Really just to support Councillor Carina in terms of the member development and training around this space, because it does sometimes get quite technical. And excuse me, if Jane were able to work with SIPFA on any kind of training or member development programme, I would certainly be very, very keen for governance and audit committee members to be party to that work.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, any other issues arising from today's meeting at all? No. Great. Thank you very much all for...
Aled, can I just say one thing?
Jeremy.
Can we avoid Friday meetings, because I always have my board meetings and all that on a Friday, and when it comes on a Friday, everything is organised, and to try and change that now just makes life a misery. And if we could go to Teams instead of Zoom, because it's always a nightmare to get into Zoom. Thank you.
I share your frustrations to some degree, Councillor Jeremy. And it's always trying to squeeze this finance panel, looking at the quarter, third quarter ever, to squeeze it in between when EMT and Cabinet sees that report and before it hits the Cabinet as well. So it is quite a squeeze for Kath, but I'm sure Kath has noted your comments. But Councillor David doesn't want to see it at 9 o'clock on Monday mornings either. So, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, for your contribution today, and thanks all cabinets, and also thank you to Lynn as well for coming along to today's meeting. With that, we'll call an end to it. So thank you all. Good morning.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.